Hi, everyone. So the idea here is to be spontaneous and have a candid conversation. So the first question that I want to ask our panelists is, what is AI in a tweet? Go ahead, Ana Maria. They didn't prepare this question.
Thank you, Amanda. Since we are being spontaneous, I will pass the word to Jean-Michel because he knows really well what AI.
Okay, and there's nobody next to me. We should have asked another panelist. So what is AI? So very short?
Yeah, very
Okay,
short.
very, very short. So AI is a wonderful technology that kept us very, very busy in the past 2 years, and that is going to keep us extremely busy in the coming years as well. And it's probably, I work in technology, so we have new things pretty much every year, every 6 months, there's something. But we don't have that many technology breakthrough, things that are really changing the way we work and changing our life as well. And AI is not the next one, is the one that is happening right now. So it's a technology that is going to change, I want to say drastically, the way that we work, but this is also going to change our personal life. So, buckle up and be prepared.
Okay. So, well, maybe I'll ask you, there's lots of papers on AI coming out this past year, some with very bullish sort of perspectives on the importance of AI, as Jean-Michel has pointed out, and others sort of saying, well, maybe it doesn't matter as much. What's your take on that?
Yes, I think that's a very important question, Amanda, and it's an important question for the region, I would say. What you see is that AI is an important technology, but long-term development has been driven by important technologies throughout many centuries. If you go to the 19th century, the Luddites, for example, were very worried about the new technologies of the cotton mill because they were going to replace them. So that's part of what happens with long-term economic development. So I would say that AI is an important technology. It's an important technology that can increase productivity and increase economic growth, but also it has some risks implied in it and some costs that can be important, and that can be very important for the region. So what you see is that some papers show that when AI is used for automation, the increases in productivity and economic growth are very small because we are not increasing really productivity. It's basically substituting for human tasks.
Yeah.
So I would say that the main message there is that it really depends on how we use AI, whether we use it to complement the work that we're doing and make it much more powerful, or whether we are just substituting and automating very basic tasks that we are doing. And for really being able to take advantage of AI and for reducing the benefit, the cost, and the risks, we really need strong institutions. We need good regulations. And I think the IDB is very well placed to help the region to look into that. And I think is really very important. All the papers, most of the papers, are for developed countries. We don't have really papers yet for the region. And that's what we need to do. We need to start understanding what's going to happen with the region. And I hope, and part of the agenda that you will see today is, okay, how do we prepare the region for AI, and how we make sure that the region really uses AI in the best way possible.
Great, and I know we're all looking forward to hearing from your team with the approach paper to with our client countries. Now I'll ask you a personal question. Do you remember, what did you do? What was your first interaction with Gen AI at the end of 2022? Did you download ChatGPT?
Yes, immediately.
Should have blocked it, but
No, for me, it was my initial reaction was total awe. It was, wow, this is really amazing. Then my second reaction was really to understand. And I did download ChatGPT and I started using it and see what was ChatGPT useful for. And it was really incredible. I use it a lot. I use generative AI a lot to substitute for many tasks that I find sometimes annoying. So I use ChatGPT for that. So that has improved my productivity, but also my life. But my third reaction, and this is the reaction where we are at the moment, is okay, what does this really imply for us at the bank? How we should take advantage of AI in our day to day? But also, and I think fascinating, more fascinating is what are we going to do? How are we going to help the region? So this is the stage where I'm now.
Yeah.
But I do use generative. I think you use it a lot as
I
well, no?
use it a lot too, but I always want to check afterwards because you're never sure if the result is actually something you can rely on. So I think that's also an important rule of thumb. Um, what about you, Jean-Michel? What's so special? What was your first interaction with Gen AI? Did you name it?
So, well, actually, I don't really want to talk about my first personal experience with generative AI because that would be about my son coming back from school, telling me that he did a great essay, but he got some help from
Oh
ChatGPT.
yeah.
So he's not going to get the grade that he was expected because they have AI checker now in high school. So that was like
In high school.
the personal thing. On the professional side, I mean, I'm leading the IT department and the tech lab, so we are looking at new technology all the time. So obviously, we were looking at AI and generative AI before ChatGPT become very, very famous, and we could definitely see the potential internally and also for the region. But I would also be lying if I won't tell you that I was very surprised about the ChatGPT wave when it came out in October. It was very crazy. I mean, it was almost from one day to the other, the world became AI.
Mhm.
Okay, everything that you go to any type of conference, it's about AI. You read an article, a document, it's about AI. And it was a bit too much, to be honest, for me sometimes. And there was a bit of craziness. I don't know if you remember after that, but um, there was a bit of everything on the press. Sam Altman going to the Congress. There was some article about AI and the end of the humanity.
The
Also article.
singularity.
Sorry.
The singularity.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly. There was like also like article about AI save a kid that the doctor could not save. So there was a bit of everything. But there was also some real questions. First questions was the ethical usage of this tool, the biases that the technology can have as well, the digital divide, making sure that this tool is not going to benefit only a few people, but the entire people. But anyway, so there was a bit of this craziness, but really my first thought when I look at the potential of the tool was like, okay, there's still a lot of questions that needs to be answered still today. There's a lot of work to be done, a lot of challenges, but there's a real opportunity to do things differently here inside the bank. I mean, if you think about it, those tools can generate content way faster than we can as a human being. And in terms of quality, even again, we need to address bias, quality of the data, and so on. It's getting very close. So for an organization like us that produce tons of content, we cannot ignore that technology. So my initial thought was like, yeah, for the IDB group, there would be probably a before AI and a after AI in terms of ways of working.
Mhm. So, Ana Maria, when you think of the next 3 to 5 years, what are the internal functions that you would expect to be AI informed? I mean, can AI write our project documents? Can we tell the difference between an AI generated project document and one that we have written?
I am smiling because we already had that discussion.
Okay, good.
And we decided that no, AI cannot write the project documents. AI works if the data underlying and the content that we are using is good,
Hmm.
and we are producing that content. So we have to be very careful on what AI can do and what AI cannot do, and I think that's important. So how do I envisage using AI? It's difficult to predict because these things are moving so rapidly that it's very difficult. Maybe you know much better than me. But the first thing is that I do believe that AI can help as as an organization. It already is. I mean, we are using AI in many dimensions, but I do believe it can help us be more effective, more productive, and do
Mm.
more innovations. Res is using AI a lot, and it's using basically what they are doing is that they are curating the content, and AI is using the content that we produce to save us some time,
Mhm.
and that I do believe is very important. So that's one important step that I believe is important. The second one is, again, how we are going to work with the governments. And for that, what we are going to do today with the agenda is that you are going to see how we are thinking about it. It's not the approach paper. I don't remember what is the
Oh,
name
yeah.
again.
It has
Remember
another
that they
name.
are changing the names all the time. But we are doing a framework or a strategy to use AI for the region. And there, I believe we have very interesting discussions. The first one is how we are going to help the countries create the institutions, the rules, and the everything that the institution, the region needs to really be using AI in a good way. The second one, which I also think is very exciting, and that we are doing much more at the IDB, as Jean-Michel mentioned, is how do we incorporate AI in our projects? Which projects can use AI, and in which projects AI is going to be important to increase the quality of our projects, the impact of what we're doing. So I would envisage that we are going to be working on these three realms. Inside the bank, what are we going to do? Second, help the countries to take advantage of AI. And the third one is operations. Fourth one, I'm sorry, which is very important, is research, knowledge. Which knowledge we need at the moment, and we need plenty of knowledge because the region doesn't have enough really to make this happen. So that's how I think we are going to move, but you never know.
Yeah. And I mean, well, of course, later, I hope you'll hear from our colleagues at IDB Invest and IDB Lab too, as well, because they're also thinking about how to use internally and externally. And obviously, their investments are very strong in this area. But Jean-Michel, what about the internal functions that you see as
In
being transformed by AI?
in 3 to 5 years, um, so I think everybody's going to be touched, sorry, by AI. Okay, if you think that you are outside, that your job probably doesn't require AI, I think you're probably wrong. Okay, in 3 to 5 years, my objective is we stop talking about AI. Okay, I'm already tired. It's been 2 years and it's already very tiring. No, but I think really the objective is like we don't talk about AI anymore in 3 to 5 years because it's completely embedded into what we do every day. You know, just like today you're sending emails, you're using Microsoft Teams, you do not think that you are doing this. And I really hope that in 3 to 5 years, AI will be embedded everywhere. So the objective is not necessarily to become an AI-driven organization. We hear this term very often, but more like an AI-embedded organization, meaning that we are using AI in every of the processes that we have. And what it means for me is exactly what Ana Maria said. I mean, we don't want to replace anything, okay? But I hope that in 3 to 5 years, the vast majority of the content that we produce would not be produced 100% by AI, but would be assisted by AI. So we will be using those technology to be able to produce maybe better content or faster content, I don't know, but assisted by AI. I hope in 3 to 5 years that we will finally tackle the data. I don't want to say data quality, but the management of the data. Ana Maria pointed out the quality of the tool will be as good as the quality of the data, and we need to govern better our data. So that's one thing that we need to do. I hope we will have all the tools that we need as well, and that's my job to make sure that every single one of you have the right tools to be able to do that. And I also hope that in 3 to 5 years we will bring the level of digital literacy inside this organization at a higher point. Okay, I think that's very important that every single one of us needs to be AI fluent and are able to use the tool, because sometimes we tend to forget that you know, we put a lot of tools in productions and use, but it's also very important that we do a bit of change management, and we are making sure that we are not leaving anybody else behind and that they can use the tool properly. That's kind of like my vision. But I think everybody is going to be impacted in 3 to 5 years. All of us will be using AI in one way or the other.
Okay, great. Are there questions from the audience, comments? Come on, don't be shy. Anyone? Okay, I will continue ad-libbing then. If you do have comments and you're watching online, please send to Teams. Is our comms person wants to tell us, or if you can just send it to my Teams, and I will be seeing it. Let me ask you a little bit about, sort of, you have an audience here. What do you think this audience wants to hear about this topic?
Well, that's difficult to interpret, Amanda, but I do believe what we have been discussing. No, what are we going to do with AI, and what is going to be the next steps? And this is basically what we're going to do today. What are we going to do with AI externally with the region, and what are we going to do internally in the bank? And also, what are we are already doing? And I think it's very important to say that we are already doing many things. The problem is that all these things that we have been doing is quite scattered, and we don't have, for the external, for the region, a strategy that allows us to be much more strategic on how to use AI. But that's what they are going to hear today, and I hope that after the day, what I would like is for us to have many questions, a path forward, many ideas on how to continue working.
Excellent. Okay, well, I now have some questions to ask you. How can we measure the success of adopting AI at the IDB? What would success look like?
You
An
don't have
easy
something.
question. Let's put it in
Yeah.
the impact framework. There's still time. Just kidding. Okay.
No, it's a good question, but measuring the success of a technology is very difficult at the end of the day. And again, if you think about, so I assume the question was more internally or
You can interpret it the way you think most appropriate.
okay. So internally, the way that we look at technology today, and not just AI, is we're trying to make your work more effective and also more pleasant. Okay. And I'm sure that some people around here are saying, well, some technology are not very pleasant and not very easy to use. I get this, but this is the objective of the IT department, is to run and transform the bank using technology and making sure that we bring more effectiveness and more client satisfaction in the way of using tool. So measuring client satisfactions and measuring effectiveness is something that is very, very difficult. Externally, I mean, I don't want to talk about too much about operations, but I also believe that in every single operations that we are doing, we need to bring more technology. You talk about Impact Plus. I believe that an operation that is using technology or AI, and the same operation that is not embedding technology and AI into the design, the one that is using technology and AI is probably going to be more impactful.
We can test that
Yeah.
as part of the knowledge agenda, right?
Yeah, no, but I think this is important. And
Yeah.
I'm the technology guy, so of course I have a bias. I would tell you that with technology, you can do everything and save the world. But I think this is important, that really technology can make an operation much better. Really technology can make a process run better and can help you with your job.
Okay, let me ask you a tough question about privacy concerns with Gen AI and data scraping bank documents. How are we going to assure data privacy? And maybe I'll ask you, Ana Maria, to start also thinking about our external work, given this is sensitive with clients.
I think this is a very important question, Amanda. And I think this is when I mention about, and when I'm talking about risks and about regulations, this is part of it. Unfortunately, the bank has been working with that. We had FAIRLAC, which part of FAIRLAC, one of the main objectives was precisely to be careful with all these privacy and the use of algorithms and avoid the biases that we can have with all these. So this is something, I don't have the correct answer. I really don't have the answer, but I can say that this is an objective and this should be one of our priorities. How are we going to make sure that we protect the privacy of the data and the privacy of the data that we're using, and that we help the region really to protect that privacy? And here there are many risks. Just think about using AI data for security reasons in the region, no? We have to be very careful with that, because there can be some overstepping of the institutions that are leading the security, the police, the military, everything, no? So that's a concern that I have, and that's a concern that we at the bank are going to be working with externally, and I would say internally. And the bank has already been working with that. No, I am here looking at Cristina because they have been leading with FAIRLAC, which is something important.
So internally, maybe I can say a few things as well on this. So that's one of the job that we have to do, is making sure that whatever you are using inside the bank is safe, secure, protect the data of the bank, protect your personal data. I have Nestor Ares and Claudio in front of me. They are in charge of data privacy. So I don't know if you want to say something on this.
No pressure.
No pressure. No, but so this is why when 2 years ago the whole thing started, as I said, there was a lot of drama and a lot of noises, but there was some real questions that need to be answered, and data privacy, the safe usage of the tool was one of them. So our job was to make sure that we are going to provide the tools where you can actually you can safely use the tool inside this organization. We have Copilot, we have Aurora, we have a series of tools that we are deploying internally where people can really safely use the tool. It's true that ChatGPT is not necessarily super safe in terms of data privacy. Everything that you enter in the tool is made public. The tool that we are deploying at the bank are our tool, the IDB group tool, and they are safe and they are protecting the data. So I think that's very important to mention.
Yeah, that's good to know. This is actually a really good question. How should we credit ChatGPT in documents? Are there conventions on this? Perhaps we need guidance. Mariano, you have
I am
an
looking
idea?
at Carlos because Carlos
Carlos?
has been working a lot on AI and maybe he knows that. I really don't know it, but Carlos, they have been working on it.
Okay, thank you. No, so basically, particularly when you are publishing in journals, now you have to disclose, and there is, each journal has their own wording that you have to disclose, where you use it for the writing, for the data analysis, etc. So there is a very explicit disclose clause for every journal publication.
Does it affect your chances of being published?
It's a good question. I don't
Okay.
think so. I don't think so,
Okay.
but it's a good question.
Okay. Right, exactly. Are you more likely to be accepted or less likely? Okay, there's a question about workforce and skills in Latin America and how the bank would contribute to that kind of skill building. And maybe I'll ask you, Ana Maria, to start, and you could say something about the tech labs too. Jean-Michel, go ahead.
Yes, I think this is a very important question, and I would say that's one of at the center of one of the concerns that I have with the generative AI for the region. AI can substitute or can complement our workforce, and currently both things are happening at the same time, and it depends. The impact of AI on the region would depend largely on what's going to happen with this, whether the workforce is going to be more substituted or complemented with AI. And that's, I think, very important. So there, as bank, we need to really think carefully how we are going to help the region. Let me give you a few data that we have that RES created, because that's important to see how the region is working with it. As I say, there is not much evidence for developing countries, but RES did this very interesting first assessment, and they created the occupational exposure to AI for a region. And it's an index that they created, which estimates the likelihood that an occupation is going to be displaced by AI. And they do it for 3 time horizons: 1 year, 5 years, 10 years. On average, they find that in 1 year, 28% of the occupations are likely to be substituted by AI, which is very large. 38% in 5 years, and in 10 years is 44%, which is very high. When you look at some occupations for this year, for 1 year, it's almost one. I mean, it's very likely that is going to be replaced. So we need to think it very well. We need to think how we are going to create again the regulations for that. How are we going to make sure that AI doesn't increase the inequality within the region because of this? And how are we going to do with the laid-off workers? Are we going to do reskilling, upskilling? Which is the programs that we need to deploy in the region for all these laid-off workers to be absorbed by other occupations, or to have more complementarity between AI and the workforce? So I think this is a very important discussion, and this is something in which we really need to work on. No? It's very important.
Yeah. I mean, if we're replacing I mean, this is already happening, right? If you go into an airport parking lot, you have a machine there and not a person giving you a ticket. It's not clear from a development perspective whether that was helpful. It's probably more efficient for the owner of the airport, of course. But what would you say to that?
That's the research that we have for developed countries. When you are automating tasks, but you are really not improving the technology, growth is not going to increase much. Basically, you are automating tasks that already exist, but you are not improving the technology that you're using. That's something that I believe is very important. Something that I haven't mentioned that I do believe is very important that Fernando, who is a part of the Fernando Vargas, who is part of the team who is doing the framework for AI, mentions a lot. We can use AI for leapfrogging, the region for leapfrogging in terms of economic growth. You all know that the region is quite stagnant in productivity and economic growth for many decades. If we don't do something to use AI for leapfrog, the gap between developed and developed countries is going to widen. So it's not only that we're going to increase inequality within the countries, but it's going to increase inequality across countries, and especially between Latin America and the Caribbean and other regions of the world. So there we also have to create the conditions for really adopting AI in a good way, and not for automating those works necessarily, but really for increasing productivity and innovation.
Jean-Michel?
Yeah, I can also because we're talking about workforce, so let me extend maybe also internally, because I got that question not often, but on a regular basis, like, okay, are you going to replace our job with AI and with technology? So the answer to that question is no. Okay, we are not planning to replace any jobs here. If the question is my job going to be impacted by AI? The answer is clearly yes. Okay, that's going to happen. And any type of job, okay? Leaders, managers, we also have to be, we are part of the concern. And I had some discussion, and sometimes I'm a bit provocative, but for me, like, the difference between a top and a performer in the future will be about the capacity of this person to actually use technology. I'm being a bit provocative here. So I think this is important, and I think so this is going to happen. We have actually Beatrice, the general manager of HRD, that is going to be here this afternoon, so she can develop a bit more on that. But I think it's important that, yeah, again, we follow the pace. We have a lot of trainings available. We are in a transition. We understand that, but there's a lot of things that we are doing at the bank in terms of transitions and in terms of training to make sure that we are able to adopt this new technology properly inside the organization.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you to
Thank you, Amanda.
Jean-Michel and Ana Maria for organizing this event.
So since we are living in this hybrid world, we are having our next speaker and our inspirational speaker on the screen, hopefully soon. There you are. Thank you, Eduardo. So because of climate change, apparently, he couldn't make it today. His flight was canceled due to Hurricane Beryl in Houston. So that's why we are doing this. And I'm pleased to introduce Eduardo Levi-Yeyati. Eduardo is a plenary professor at Universidad Torcuato Di Tella in Buenos Aires and leads the Center for Evidence-Based Policy. He has an impressive career in economics and public policy, including roles at the World Bank and Berkeley. Eduardo has also led the National Council of Production and CPEC, a very well-known think tank in Argentina. He recently published a book, Automatizados, about the effects of AI on our labor lives. And just yesterday or the day before yesterday, he published an article in Americans Quarterly. And Eduardo shared some thought-provoking insights on AI, suggesting that it could actually be beneficial for Latin American and the Caribbean. He argues that AI might equalize wages and challenges the idea that education alone can compete with advancing technology. So today, he'll dive into these ideas and more, and then we can have a conversation. So welcome, Eduardo Levi-Yeyati. The screen is yours, I guess.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm sorry I can't be there with you. I will try to share a presentation just to keep track of my thoughts. Hold on a sec. There you are. Okay. Can you see that? The presentation? Yeah.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. So you all know the say that it's very difficult to make predictions, particularly by predictions about the future. And this is a case in point, because if you think of the impact of AI, particularly in labor markets, what we were saying 5 years ago and what we are saying now, I would say how this debate changed in the last year and a half. You'd see how difficult it is to now for me to tell you what's going to happen in the next 5 years. But one thing is important is that the debate actually changed dramatically. And let me summarize what I think was the consensus view 5 years or even 2 years ago, and where I think it is moving right now. So has moved actually after the GPT and the large language models. So not long ago, automation was seen as something, as a technology that would replace medium-skilled jobs. You'll remember David Autor's U-shaped curve, possibly depressing low-skilled wages due to competition from displaced middle-skilled workers. The idea was that as you depleted or you replaced middle-skilled workers, these workers could only move downward, and there would be a lot of an excess supply of labor for lower-skilled jobs, and that would actually widen the wage dispersion and the skill premium. And something that was exacerbated, this widening, by the pandemic. The pandemic actually eliminated or affected a lot of contact jobs that were typically low-skilled jobs. So this widening, this U actually started to be more like a monotonic upward trending line. And again, it was seen that precisely because of that, countries that were more intensive in middle-skilled jobs, particularly Latin America, would be the ones that were most vulnerable. And you'll remember many studies, particularly a World Bank study that placed the percentage of jobs that would be potentially substituted at around 60% in some countries. Very, very high numbers, and way above the same numbers for the UK or the US. And vulnerability was measured as the probability of an occupation being, or a task being automated. And that's something that is important, and we'll come back to that. But we're always measuring exposure from the supply side, the technological possibility of substitution. And there is something to say about that. And education, and we're all mentioning that just now in the previous dialogue. Education was seen as one of the main tools to actually run the race between education and technology. Tim Bergen's race, the way in which he puts the evolution of inequality as a race between technology and training, I would say. So training was seen until very recently as the main tool. And in particular, I wanted to cite a CPR survey conducted by the CFM and the CPR in May, probably early 2023, but it was published in May 2023. And in that survey, experts still maintain that rich countries were the ones that were going to be more benefited. And in fact, they believed that there were going to be marginal job destruction because the technology, and I quote, would create as many jobs as it would destroy. And that was the view in May of last year. Now, this is sort of a practical illustration of the idea underlying all those conclusions. On the left-hand side, we have Autor's well-known U-shaped curve of relative job destruction, relative job creation, showing that, and I wanted to focus on the green dotted line, which is the most recent for this paper. It's a paper from 2014. He was actually pointing out that middle skill, in the x-axis, we have initial wages for particular occupations, and the wage was a proxy for the skill intensity. So middle skill jobs were going to lose against low skill and high skill jobs. Low skill, because of the Bolaños paradox, some jobs, some manual, very rustic or rudimentary jobs are very difficult to code, very difficult to automate. and high skill because training was the way to compete with substitution. And that was a few years ago. And on the right-hand side, we have an update of these numbers that we prepared with Marcela Escobari for Brookings in 2021, I think, in which we traced Otto's U-curve. That would be the orange line. And then we computed how this changed during the pandemic. And you see in the pandemic, the contact jobs, the low-skill jobs were the most punished. So the U now looks as an upward, sloping curve. Now, this is no longer, if we look at where we are heading now, and recent papers, including those researchers, David Autor has a very nice, many, but one very nice paper that actually perfectly contradicts the U-curve that he was sustaining 5, 10 years or 20 years ago. And that's because what we are starting to understand is that generative AI is de-skilling, meaning it replaces knowledge and skills even at a higher level. So if we want to train to compete with this, with technology, and particularly with AI, that competition is doomed to fail. There's no way you can actually train someone to compete with, at least in a traditional way, to compete with AI. And that means that AI, this generative AI, and particularly if we reach that point, general AI will undermine education and seniority, essentially will substitute skills, and thereby will narrow the skill premium, which is the opposite as we were expecting 5 years ago. And that's due to this, I call it a Robin Hood effect, which is somewhat paradoxical because it reduces wage dispersion, which is good for equity, but it widens the dispersion between, say, labor and the owners of the technology. So in other words, it will widen the inequality, the concentration of wealth in the super rich, and particularly in the owners of the technology. And it will essentially keep reducing labor shares, which is something we have seen in the past few years in many countries, but that would ultimately reduce it even further, presenting a distribution problem. And we'll come back to that in a second. What else do we know now? Well, education, I'm not saying we shouldn't try education as a tool to compensate substitution, but ultimately cannot compete with technology in a broader sense, in the sense that once we have artificial general intelligence, which some experts, and here linking, these links go to particular papers, and I'm linking to a very nice scenario review by Anthony Korinek. But most experts, including himself, place within 20 years, sometimes even earlier. I think that there's always an over-optimism about those predictions, but my point is that this will not stop here. This is just the beginning, right? We're moving towards an artificial intelligence that will be able to substitute any intellectual task made by humans. So nobody ultimately will be immune to potential technological substitution. I'm not saying that this will happen. I'm saying that we're going to adopt this technology, to adopt the artificial worker, but there will be a possibility. Technology will not be a barrier in 20, 30 years. And as a result of that, the ranking of countries relative to exposure inverted. And in a recent IMF study that you probably read, Latin America is actually better prepared. I mean, less exposed, not very prepared, less exposed, and better placed to face this technological wave. And here is one chart, one illustration that I took directly from this IMF study, in which they compare, and this is interesting, they compare, on the one hand, the exposure to substitution in their emerging markets, and Latin America is essentially mostly within the green group. They say that emerging markets are less exposed on the one hand, on the other hand, are less prepared. So the exposure metric now, it's a little bit more complex, I think, for the better, because we need to take into account this preparedness. There are many indexes. The one that the IMF prepared comprises items like dimensions like digital infrastructure, innovation and economic integration, human capital and labor market policies and regulations, the composition of human capital. I imagine that includes the skill intensity of the workforce, and a number of aspects associated with regulation and ethics. And I would probably add to that index, there's something, I mean, there are other indexes and there are ones that include more things. I would add tracks and transfer arrangements to promote productive and complementary technology, something that has been proposed by many economists, most notably Acemoglu and Johnson in his book, or Daniel Roderick in many of his recent papers on good jobs. But the point here is that the measurement of how do we fare in this context is a little bit more complex because of the preparedness dimension and because of an additional dimension I want to highlight here. I will provide some examples that I would call the human factor. I still don't have a name for that, but you'll see what I mean when it comes to the examples. Now, in a nutshell, this human factor is actually thinking on the demand side of the equation. Particularly, we can, I can give you some examples of technologies that are already ready, but it's not obvious that the consumer, the demand will be there for these automated artificial goods and services. So even if we have the capacity to substitute a lot of labor, some of these occupations will still demanded to be made by humans. That's sort of the key idea behind this human factor aspect. So, there are a number of non-technological barriers. This is important because most of the predictions are essentially based on the technological predictions of technology, whether the technology will be capable of performing those tasks. There are a number of non-technological barriers to substitution and technology adoption, and I want to emphasize a couple of them, but there are many more that may, work as a protection for certain occupations. For human workers, because there will be the need for either a human interface or human producing, human actually performing those tasks. And so let me go a little more in detail into that. One thing to be sure is that even if these non-technological barriers actually materializes, there will be fewer jobs, right? Something that you have to bear in mind. I will elaborate on this more in detail, but first of all, you have to understand one thing, and that's something that always puzzles me when people say there will be more occupations, new tasks, new jobs created as technology replaces the old ones. But technology is not replacing jobs or tasks. Technology is replacing functions of a human worker. So we replaced long ago. Well, this started in the late 60s, I suppose, with the numerical control machines. We substituted manual work, long ago, and we kept substituting more manual work as we move along. This is an automobile factory, but this picture may have been taken 3-4 decades ago. We also, we have been gradually substituting some of these more rudimentary, repetitive, intellectual work, white-collar work. This picture is taken from a well-known movie played by Jack Tati, but it's a good illustration how artificial was to place all these people working as synchronous in the same room, isolated by a box. And the office was something sort of unnatural that the pandemic revealed to be kind of unnecessary. This works. A great chunk of these tasks can be already automated. What we are substituting is not the job. We are substituting the function of the human worker here. And ultimately, what the predictions tell us is that the technology will actually substitute the very sophisticated work of a scientist or an engineer. The ones that were supposed to be the thresholds, the places where the human work would resort to when automation, the old automation, the one we were thinking of 5 or 10 years ago, would be already implemented. So the question is not whether there will be a new job. The question is it going to be a new job or task that will not be able to be substituted the same as the previous ones? Because for sure there will be new create new jobs and tasks and occupations. But if the function is already being substituted, then there's no reason why the human worker will actually be demanded to perform that job. So there will be fewer jobs, and that's something we have to come to terms. And we have to say that ultimately we will need a solution to that lack of jobs, and particularly in distributional terms, because labor inclusion is today the key tool for labor for income distribution. If that's not there in 20 years or 30 years time, or is performing half of the task, we need to rethink our distribution schemes, our redistribution schemes, to make up for the lack of jobs. And that's something I will talk about at the very last slide. The second thing I wanted to illustrate, I think it's obvious by now, but it's something that we have been researching on and seeing only recently, is that the new technology actually substitutes all sorts of skills, and it's sort of the end of knowledge. It's a good illustration, this picture, because this is essentially a guy that's actually taking the knowledge exam. You know that if you have been to London, you know that London cabbies have to take an exam called the Knowledge of London, in which they go all over. They train to take the exam by driving all over London and memorizing the map. And you know how difficult that is in London. And it takes 1 to 3 years, and these guys, take the exam, and they are London cab drivers. And because of the exam, because of the skill demanded to pass the exam, they become middle-income workers, right? Well, not anymore, because obviously the GPAs had substituted this knowledge. And this is a very old example. And now the applications for the knowledge exam have plummeted, simply because we have Uber, and studying for an exam that can be so easily substituted by an application doesn't make much sense. So this is an old example, but there are many recent examples showing exactly the same thing. There are papers showing that AI increases the productivity of personnel working in call centers, or the productivity of low-skilled taxi drivers in Tokyo relative to high-skilled taxi drivers in Tokyo. So the question here is, well, if the technology substituted skills, what should we study? I mean, how do we train if this training is not monetized in the market? So it opens completely different perspective on education. If you want to reskill, and reskilling was a key word 5 years ago, the question is, reskilling for what? What type of skills do we need if these skills that we thought were useful now are being so easily substituted? Obviously, another downside of this knowledge substitution, of the fact that you are not being paid for your skill, for your training, is that labor shares will go down. So will continue to go down. This is the US, but in many Latin American countries, it's also happening. And the more the effective labor is eroded by the substitution of skills, making skilled labor equal to an unskilled labor, the less labor as a whole will receive of the smaller share will receive of the total output. Now, another point is important before going to the non-technological barriers. It's important to understand is what we talk about when we talk about artificial intelligence in general. Even general artificial intelligence will not be a sentient intelligence. We're not talking about a replicant, a sentient cyborg that can ultimately dominate the world. There are people that actually think of artificial intelligence as different steps towards a singularity, a sentient intelligence. Even I always remember Arthur Clarke, the writer in the 60s, saying that the machines will be to us as we were to the Neanderthals. So there will be the next evolutionary stage. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about something closer to, again, going back to Arthur Clarke, to HAL, the computer in 2001, the movie and the book, which is a computer that actually in the movie kills 2 astronauts, attempts to kill 2 astronauts, kill one and is disconnected by the second one, but not because of a rebellion against the human race, because it was programmed to do that. That is important. I mean, when we talk about artificial intelligence, we're talking about the program that is pre-trained by stuff, things, information, behavior, documented from humans, behavior by humans and documented by humans, and instead, in many cases, receive the feedback of humans. So it's a machine that's programmed by us, in some cases, replicating us and doing whatever we do in the same way, but much better, with all the goods and bads. So if we go to, if we think of artificial intelligence, something different that can correct or dialogue with us, I think that's to some extent an illusion, because it's essentially regurgitating and recombining information that is prepared by humans and is updated by humans. So, that's one of the things that's important to understand, these non-technological barriers that I wanted to highlight. Okay, what do we talk about that? What is a non-technological barrier? Imagine that you have a self-driving car ready to be deployed. Again, this is an old example. In, I think, 2016, a group of researchers, mainly computer scientists and psychology researchers, created what's called the moral machine to ask moral questions to users. Thousands, and I think around thousands of millions of users actually got into the site and answer these questions. They were like psychological tests, particularly directed to think of the moral of an artificial intelligence, moral of automation. And the idea here, and that's why it's interesting to make the point I want to make, is that you all know the trolley problem, in which we have to decide whether to save a large number of people by killing a smaller number of people, and we have to switch we have to sort of touch a switch or a button or to deviate the trolley from one line, that one track that is actually populated by people, and to another one that's where there is one or two or fewer people. We have to sort of test whether our decisions are utilitarian or have some additional moral restrictions. Well, this is a well-known case, and we, in a real life, we can accept that a driver deviates and accidentally kills someone because it's an accident. But if you think of a company selling autonomous cars, the fact that the car actually make a choice to save some people and deliberately kills another one, simply because it's less costly from a utilitarian point, that is acceptable for humans, is not acceptable for a company. So that might be a legal and commercial liability for a company. And that means that even if the car is ready to go into the street, and even if it's programmed to take a utilitarian view and does it correctly, still there is some commercial problems there, or legal problems that needs to be settled, and that might delay the implementation of the technology indefinitely. The same with the second example. Again, it's just an old one. It's an application called Compass that was used. I don't know whether it's still used, but it was used in the late 2010s to judge recidivism risk, to judge whether a convicted felon could be left free under parole, on parole. So the key question was, what was the propensity of this guy, given his track record and many other aspects, to do it again? And what was discovered in a number of papers documenting this is that when the program was asked to judge based on a number of factual information and the aspect, and particularly the race of these convicts, the program displayed the same racism that the judges based on whose decisions was trained. The program was trained. When asked, the program actually exhibited the same biases, the same racism in this case, than those judges. Now, the racism may be criticized for a human being, but is somewhat accepted as has been in the past many decades. But the program itself cannot be so biased. So in a sense, that poses a limit to the implementation of technology is already there, simply because there is no way to correct, to unbias this program that was trained on based on the actions of biased people. And the illustration of how difficult it is to unbias a program is the recent Gemini affair. And these are the illustrations that you could get when you ask, for instance, the Gemini AI to draw a German soldier of the year 1942, and it appeared, black people, Jewish people, and women. What I'm trying to say is that it's difficult to make this, to correct this bias, since that in turn might be delaying the implementation of many of these policies. Additionally, another aspect that I think is important from the demand side that might delay and somewhat protect certain occupations, human occupations, is the fact that some cultures may be more familiar or willing to accept a robot teacher. And this is actually a real robot teacher in India. The picture is from 3 or 4 years ago. It's something that actually exists. But there's something eerie, something weird to have a robot teaching your kids. And this is a question, it's an open question. My conjecture is that to some extent, there will be certain resistance, and we will want to have human teachers with our, particularly in primary and early childhood and primary school. We would like to have human teachers taking care of our kids. Because there is something, as I said before, something weird, something ominous of having a robot that is so close in resemblance, so close to a human. Something is called in theory the uncanny valley theory, that actually postulates that the more an artificial figure resembles a human being, the more eerie, the more sinister it looks. And these are essentially, this is an example. Something actually happened to me when I saw the latest Indiana Jones, where Harrison Ford was artificially rejuvenated, was artificially changed to resemble his younger self. Then we have another completely different dimension that I think is important to understand, where substitution works and where it doesn't. Which has to do with a well-known Walter Benjamin essay. It's called The Art in the Era of Mechanical Reproduction, and has to do with the production of a number of cultural consumption in general, in particular with the AI painters and AI musicians and AI movie directors. This is a painting that was sold. It's a well-known case. It was sold, I think, in 2019 in Christie's. It's called the Baron of Bellamy or something like that. It was prepared by a guy called the pseudonym was obvious, and was sold in Sotheby's, in Christie's, by $450,000, a little bit more than the one Andy Warhol, small Warhol, was also in the same auction. So it was a big hit because it was an AI, a purely AI art that was sold as a masterpiece. And but the same year, the second attempt to sell AI art, which was this one, it's called Memories of the Passerby by Mary Klingemann. It was sold way below the estimate, and so Bellamy was estimated to be around $10,000 and was sold by $450,000. And this one was estimated to be sold by a maximum of $40,000. It was sold, I think, in the low 10,000s. What I'm trying to say is that, to some extent, the first one was a novelty, was a curiosity, something that people would pay for because it was the first time. So there was something unique, as it is unique and a work of art. The second one was just artificial art, it was like a copy. In Benjamin words, it would be the mechanical reproduction of art, which is typically much less valuable. And the question here is, to what extent there will be demand for this artificial art or artificial music in a world that values this human factor, this uniqueness, aura, in the words of Walter Benjamin. I mean, will we consume? We'll go to a restaurant and consume the dinner prepared by a robot chef. I always use this picture of a craft work to illustrate my point of view, which is a conjecture, as I said, it's very difficult to predict the future, but I think that, I want to see a Kraftwerk concert. They opened for Radiohead a few years ago here in Buenos Aires, and it was a concert. Four guys with computers. That was it. The guys wouldn't talk, wouldn't dance, wouldn't say anything to the public. They would play the computers. Now, if they at some point in this program, in this concert, they had abandoned the stage and let the computer play by itself, the music would have been exactly the same, but I would have left the concert because I will never go to listen to a computer. So the idea that we can automate the creation of music, of art, of literature, I think is highly doubtful. I don't think there will be a demand for those copies out there, which means that there are a number of occupations associated with this so-called human factor of human age. Teachers, child and adult carers, therapists, writers and actors and artists, theater actors and indirect jobs involved in making movies and in creating concerts and preparing the theater, and chefs and designers and all sort of artisanal producers in general that will be somewhat protected, not because technology will not be able to substitute for those tasks, but simply because there will not be demand, or at least the demand will be partially geared towards human objects, things made by humans, right? And this is important to some extent because, we have many in our countries in general, but in the world, in our countries in particular, many jobs that are directly related to these creations. I'm thinking about all these tourism-related industry, for instance. There are jobs that will be protected by consumers, protected by the demand. Another point is important to highlight before going to policy issues in Latin America, which I think is sort of the bottom line of this presentation, is that we can think of, we don't know where the future will lead us, but we can think of two futures, and the idea to go to one or the other will depend a lot on how we prepare right now. It's like climate change here, but with a twists. In climate change, we know that if we don't mitigate, that we were all doomed. Although, because we're running behind the curve, we need to adapt because we'll get there, in the best case, rather late. I don't think technology can be mitigated. I think technology will advance one way or another. It's very difficult to coordinate, regulate, and even post technology. Because these companies have independence, there are a lot of international arbitrage. There are countries that will always be willing to deregulate and host these new technological giants. It's very difficult to get a coordination. The same happened with climate change. So this will happen, and the question, the focus, unlike the case of climate change, should be placed on adaptation. Right? Now, adaptation is the difference between this scenario and the scenario and the utopian scenario. If we don't do anything, and judging from what we just said before, the substitution of labor will lead to a deepening in our dual societies. We will have probably a small share of super rich or rich people getting the profits and the rents of the technology, and then we'll have a number of unemployed or subemployed workers receiving less and less of the total output, and that equals an economic depression. And it's important. That's why so many entrepreneurs and so many rich people actually are calling for ways to rethink the redistribution issue. And this will be even worse in our cases in countries in Latin America, because we already have a dual society with insiders and outsiders of the labor market. We'll have probably more outsiders and fewer insiders as we move on, as technology substitute jobs. And we need to do something to avoid this sort of laissez-faire scenario of unequal stagnation, to put it this way. And this chart is essentially sort of an illustration of, it's not made by AI actually. This is Mumbai. Probably you've seen this picture before, but this sort of illustration of dual society to which we are moving if we don't do anything in terms of adaptation, I think it's very very illustrative. Now, the other scenario, the alternative scenario, and this a picture is so the joke is part of a series describing the lives of the Bloomsbury group. Down there, you can see sitting on the lawn, John Maynard Keynes. Keynes was part of this Bloomsbury group in London, wrote in 1930, 36. I always miss that date. A small opus called Economic Opportunities for My Grandchildren, in which he hypothesized that increasing productivity due to technological advance will lead us to a society in which most of us will work 15 hours per week, and the rest of the day will do what Keynes used to do with the Bloomsbury, just sitting there in the backyard and listening to quartets and drinking tea. But regardless of what you do in your spare time, there is a scenario in which we have smaller, fewer jobs and smaller work, fewer hours of work, and we live from something else. But for that, we need to address a new redistributive scheme. There is no way in which we can compete with technology to preserve labor as our key distribution channel, income distribution channel. So we have to think how to get to this point. The thing that Keynes was not mentioning, because he saw that productivity would be naturally distributed among everybody. He was not thinking about how this productivity will be distributed. If we don't do it if the governments don't do it, the fact that we have super rich with low propensity to consume and a lot of poor people with high propensity to consume but no resources will lead us to an economic depression, and this bucolical future, this utopia, leisure utopia, will not materialize. And now, what can we say in light of all the previous very brief introductions to different topics? What can we say about the future of the workforce in LAC? Well, there are two things. First of all, we have to separate times, right? We are now in the middle of a transition. So we have to work with the transition. And the transition involves two clear fronts. The first one is the past. We have pending assignments. And that means we are actually, we still have to create jobs and reduce the dual nature of our markets, dual in the sense of a lot of informal and dependent workers that are without benefits and with a very unstable labor income. Something I tend to gather in the precarity group, the precarious group, have a growing precarity in Latin America. We also have outdated education. Our education in many countries, generalizations are often typically, but my impression from Latin American education systems is that they're looking backwards more than forward, in the sense that we're still thinking of education an education for a time in which we prepare a career, we work in the same occupation, sometimes the same company for ages, and then we retire by a certain age. And the fact is that this career-based path is actually, I won't say obsolete, but it's representing a smaller, more share of what actually happens in the labor markets today. So we have to think of education in a different way, not only in terms of contents and in terms of including technology in our classrooms, but also in terms of length, and the idea that we have 5 years or 6 years of a bachelor's in Latin America, and we have overlooked so much all the other shorter tertiary education, higher superior education, non-university education is something that is already taxing our students when they want to go to the markets, to labor markets, and will be even more outdated as technology moves on. And also have, a problem with that actually Ana Maria mentioned of uneven digital access uneven access to digital resources. That if technology becomes a more key in our work in our education, we will, in our countries that have so limited, in some cases, some regressive access to digital resources will suffer in terms of inequality and also in terms of the capacity to, preserve at least, to have a decline in the number of jobs will be smoothed out through these transition policies. And also we have old-fashioned legacy views. If you look at or talk with experts in labor markets, they still talk about the demarcation and hours and the location where the workers should work. I don't know how this discussion played out at the IDB, but the idea that we have to work everybody in the same place at the same time is somewhat questionable because of technology, because of the nature of the service sector in particular, and after the pandemic, because of the many things that we learned by working remote. And most of our benefits, our system of labor benefits are based on the job rather than the worker. And that's something that as we move away from the traditional job structure, we need to compensate because I'm thinking of many Latin American countries where the employed people, formally employed people in the private sector are 30%, 40%. They're not even the majority. And we don't have anything designed for this other 70, 60%. This is just to give you an idea of the degrees of informality of some of these countries. I don't know why I can't show you the names are not there, so I'll probably skip that. But informality has been growing even in some countries, particularly in Argentina. Now, then we have the future. And this is important because at the end of the day, if you ask me, I think that there is no way we'll be able to preserve all those jobs. So we need to think more strategically, and particularly if you rethink our education, our vocational training, we need to think of technological change as a train, a moving train. We have to jump on the moving train. So we need to target the position of the train in some time in the future. You need to know where this train is moving. You need to know what jobs will be there in 5 years, in 10 years, right? What skills will be needed? The jobs will be there probably, but there will be most of these tasks will be substituted and we'll need new tasks. The job will have the same name, the occupation will have the same name, but the content will be different. And we need to understand that in order to answer the key question here. If we want to reskill our labor force or train our students to be workers in the future, we need to know, what's left for the human worker, right? And we all know that, that the human worker will need to complement the machine, but this is too broad. We need to be a little bit more precise of what we mean by complementing. Obviously, everybody would need to be able to work with the machine, as Mariano was saying, or somebody was saying in the previous panel, but that in terms of training, we need to be much more specific and strategic. Instead of training the same thing we've been training the past 20, 30 years, we need to see through this transition to see where we are ending, what is the end game in terms of labor demand, skills, demands for skills. And on route to profit, I think from the Robin Hood effect of complementary AI, I mean, we know that our workforce is less skilled, less qualified than in advanced economies. And we know we have a problem, and wage dispersion is actually a problem associated with that. And also in terms of education, we know that our teachers in many countries are not ideally prepared for the task, and technology can help. So to some extent, if we think of an agenda in terms of policy, we need to be able to use the current technology to complement the lack of skills, which will be persistent. A relative lack of skills, will be persistent in our country. So, profit from the Robin Hood effect is important in that sense. We can make the combination of AI and a low middle skill worker can make a skill sort of compound workers. So something that is close to this is a term that is no longer used, but it's close to the idea of commoditization, in the sense that we have a sort of the sum of these parts, of these two parts actually better than these parts in themselves. So
You have
I
2 more
think,
minutes, Eduardo. Sorry to
yes.
interrupt.
No, I understand. I think luck may have an advantage on these two first aspects, right? Because first of all, I think our culture will still demand many, the human factor will be more relevant in Latin America. I believe it will be easier to substitute carers, to automate carers, adult and child carers in Japan or China than in Latin America. That cultural difference may play in favor of preserving those jobs. And the Robin Hood effect, of course, if David Otto is saying, let's, for the US, let's save our middle class through this sort of complementary AI, that the AI actually, substitutes for skills, we can say the same thing in terms of our workforce. If our workforce is less skilled than the advanced economy one, well, we have to use this in our advantage because we have more to gain from this effect. And then there are a number of other things, like other policy issues, policy that I mentioned, I think are urgent, particularly to address precarity. For instance, we need to embrace non-standard forms of employment. Non-standard is a newly coined term used by the ILO to name all these platforms and multiple employers and gig type of jobs. They still don't know how to assimilate this to the previous, the traditional labor forms, labor regulations. But we need to actually embrace it and think out of the box, because this will be probably the prevalent form of work in the future. And by the same token, we need to rethink our benefits scheme to make them more worker-based rather than job-based. And these are all policy measures that are essential during transition, so that the impact of technological change in the next 5, 10, 15 years is not even, it doesn't deepen the regressivity of our dual labor markets and dual society. And also we need to understand where AI is moving, and to the extent possible, try to orient the AI to be more either productive, to avoid the Turing trap that was mentioned before. I think Ana Maria was mentioning that. And sometimes you substitute simply to cut cost, but you're not increasing productivity. So if you cut cost, you increase inequality, but you don't increase the actual size of the pie. Redistributing in this context is much more difficult. So I mentioned to the extent possible, because I'm not so sure that we can actually tell these companies where to go, but we need to try. And then there is the very long run. And the very long run essentially, and with this I close, forces us to think of new ways of redistribution. Because again, ultimately, we may have demand for certain tasks. We may have some human-specific jobs that consumers would like to preserve, but there won't be enough. And they won't be rewarded. I mean, we may have a lot of demand for carers in the future, but that doesn't mean that we'll be paid higher wages. The same is happening right now in the US, for instance. Probably carers, adult carers, probably the house carers are probably the most, the occupation is growing the most, and still they're being paid minimum wage. So I'm trying to say is that we need at some point, and this is part of our policy analysis, we need to think how to decouple jobs and occupations from income distribution. We need to think income distribution away from the role that so far had been largely taken by income policies. So, the fiscal side of this technological tsunami, I think, is as important as the labor policy side. I don't want to be so negative, so I want to leave with this aspirational idea that I got from Twitter, that essentially describes sort of a leisure utopia that presumes that you're getting the money from something else. I live here because I really would like to listen to the questions, but this is sort of an overview of what my article, the pieces, the material, the books that were mentioned in the presentation go touch on those different topics.
Thank you very much, Eduardo. And in fact, I have so many questions on my own and from the audience. We won't have all the time to make those questions. but I'll try to do 2 or 3, and I will ask you to be brief in your answers, please, so we can have more of a conversation. But I have one question that is really, really important, Eduardo. I'm from Colombia, and I'm sure if I ask ChatGPT who would won the Copa America on Sunday, ChatGPT would say Argentina. But we know
Yeah,
it's wrong.
uh,
So how we can make AI better understand the present reality and not only rely on the past?
it's interesting. Look, beyond the Colombia Argentina the joke, I always put the same example. If you only have the Google translators or the automatic translators, the artificial translators, then in 20 years, those translators will be speaking an old language, an archaic language, because the language is moving, and we need humans to actually update those. And this is happening, right? There is feedback. There's feedback by when you open GPT, they ask you whether the answer was right or wrong. They're asking feedback all the time. But before that, all those large language models are pre-trained using large data sets. They are also feedback, they receive feedback from humans. And I think that interface between the artificial and the final user will always be human, or in most cases. We will always need the human interface for many reasons. First, to update. Second, we need to be our own interface, because otherwise we're putting ourselves in the hands of the artificial intelligence, and then any hallucination artificial intelligence can have, and they do have those, will be taken as truth. We need to know how to light a fire, even if we have an oven, because sometimes you don't have an oven. So it's important to keep that in mind. One of the perils of artificial intelligence is putting all our lives and our data and our information in the hands of a machine. So the interface is important, operationally, but also as a self-defense mechanism, I think.
Agreed. Thank you very much. But in line with that, and as you were saying, and this is, I'm going to take 2 or 3 questions and try to put it together. It seems that the region is in the middle of the distribution between preparedness and exposure, right? And you say that lag is lagging, has been lagging in many of these preparedness factors. So I think my question would be, among those factors, what do you believe is the most binding constraint in Latin America, and how can we do in this context to change government incentives to address these issues?
I think, I mean, let's simplify for the sake of brevity and take 2 dimensions: digital access and the use of AI in education and training, right? In the second case, I think there's a lot of resistance from the educational tribe. I think we have to convince the teachers, particularly urban ones, but you have to convince teachers that AI is a tool for them. It's complementary, it's fully complementary. It's one of the points I want to make with the human factor. I mean, the teacher will still be there, but will be a better teacher if he uses AI. There is a lot of resistance to include AI in the classroom. I mean, the typical teacher, typical education expert will say, well, but there are a number of flaws in AI, but still, AI is essential to, for instance, to take care of a very heterogeneous classroom, which is the case in many public schools in Latin America, because we have these people, these students came from very heterogeneous houses, right? Socioeconomic backgrounds. And you have one teacher, 40 guys, 40 kids with very different problems and different speeds, and you can't actually multiply yourself to address all those differences. And AI helps you there. So there are a number of cases in which AI is your friend, but it's not being received as such by the community, by the educational community. And in terms of digital access, I'm really puzzled that governments have not put digital access, universal digital access, as a state policy. Really, I mean, I to work preparing programs for presidential candidates. I've been talking with the presidential candidates, and they don't understand the urgency and the importance of having universal access. So they're impassive. I don't know why this is happening. We should push for governments to put this at key of the agenda. The digital access is like the train in the 19th century. I mean, this is going to move the economies. It will increase participation, it will increase education, and it also will distribute better people. I mean, if we want to distribute, if we want to support, small towns, small villages, and want to distribute people away from the suburban areas of the big mega cities, digital access is a key, is a way to go. So I'm always surprised that it's not there, but this should be a key topic, a policy topic, in which actually the IB can help a lot.
So I think I wonder if this resistance to automation could be generational located, like more
Yes.
new generations could have more, like be prone
And
to
our
automation,
politicians
right?
our politicians
Yes.
tend to be old. Yes. No, I understand. And I can give you some examples. I don't want to name names, but people that simply don't understand the technology. They're fascinated by the technology. We have to move on from the fascination and just use it. There are a lot of old guys, old politicians that understand that it's a change and say, look, what, how fantastic these things are, the new apps, and they're always following, running after the new apps. But this is much deeper, and they need to. I mean, we need to surround these guys with younger guys. Actually, explain to them that the future is actually here, and it's this technology and many others, right? No, there is a lot of I think technological backwardness in policy and politics in Latin America. Not so much in private sector. Private sector is actually moving in that direction, but I think in politics is yes, we have to help them understand the usefulness and the urgency of this topic.
If you can see, my chat is full of questions, but I'm getting a big sign of 0 minutes in front of me. So thank you
Let's do
very
like that.
much for your insightful presentation. I hope you will be here soon in the next time to have that conversation, more deeper conversation on these issues. Thank you very much to all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Eduardo. Thank you, Cristina. We're going to take a very short break, like 5-10 minutes. So I'm going to ask you to be very quick on the break. And we're going to come back here at 11:20 max. We have a very good panel coming up on a discussion of the AI approach paper for the region. So you don't want to miss that. And then the president would be here as well. So please be super quick, back here at 11:20. Thank you.